All right, guys, welcome to Question of Strength, where I essentially spend my time talking about things that are either are interesting to me regarding training, nutrition, supplementation, or actually help you with your own training experience. And then, of course, the main part of the whole podcast is to answer your questions. Always leads to pretty interesting answers because, well, a lot of your questions are interesting. The more questions you post, the better answer you get. And also, I find that for every person who posts a question, it probably helps several other. Because we each are training hard, and if you've been following my stuff, you probably belong to a certain category of people who love a certain type of training. So when someone has a question, it normally answers and help out many other people. So you can just type your question in the chat room on the right side of that YouTube page. So, all right, I want to get started by talking to another subject that is very dear to my heart, and that's intermittent fasting. You might have seen this one coming because I spent the last 2 weeks talking quite a bit about it, mostly because I got a question for someone who claimed that I'm doing intermittent fasting. I'm starting eating at 11 a.m. and my last meal is at 7 p.m. And sure, it seems to fit the 16 to 8 ratio of what we're looking for when it comes to intermittent fasting. So 16 hours of being fasted and 8 hours where you're not fasted. That's a very important distinction than 16 hours of not eating and 8 hours of eating, because as I mentioned in that video and that answer, once you've done eating a meal, you are not fasted. You're fasted once you digested all the meal and absorb its nutrients. Then the fasting starts. So if your last meal was at 7 p.m., at 7:01, you're not fasted. At 8, you're not fasted. At 9, probably not fasted either. And it's likely that you are still not fasted completely, depending on the size of the meal. So if you are indeed 16 hours without eating, in reality, you're probably fasted for something like 12 or 13 of those hours, which is insufficient to trigger most proclaimed benefits of fasting. Also, another rule, I'm going to get to that in a moment. But anyway, the topic I want to cover today is who should be doing intermittent fasting, what actually intermittent fasting is, and for what goals is it not an appropriate strategy. Okay. So first, let's again read what fasting or fasting is. It's a state where you digested all the food you've been eating and you've absorbed the nutrients. So you are that's when you're fasted. You're not fasted right after a meal. It takes several hours to digest and absorb everything. Okay. So you're truly fasted only when you have an empty stomach and you have absorbed all of those nutrients, right? Now, what I personally consider to be qualifiable as intermittent fasting is if you are fasted for at least 60 continuous hours. And again, it's not 16 hours where you're not eating, it's 16 hours where you are in a fasted state. So that's my first rule. You need to be fasted for at least 16 hours to qualify for intermittent fasting. So that's when like autophagy starts and all the good stuff that when it comes to intermittent fasting. Also, my second rule is that at least half of those fasted hours need to be done when you are awake and ideally physically active. The reason is enzyme that is triggered and gives you most of the benefits of fasting, called AMPK, is released when you have a pretty significant need to mobilize stored energy. Okay? So, of course, if you're fasted, so you have no energy coming in, then there's a need to mobilize stored energy. But that need is even greater if you are moving around, if you're doing stuff. If you're lying in bed sleeping, you are expending a lot less fuel, a lot less energy, so there's less need to mobilize that energy, even if you're fasted. Okay? So an hour where you are fasted while awake is a lot more effective than an hour when you are fasted while sleeping. So at least half of those fasted hours, at least 8 hours, should be done while you are awake and physically active. And ideally, the more of those hours you have while being awake, the more effective. it's going to be. So right from the start, you can see that the 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. Period, that's not fasting. That's called skipping breakfast. Okay? And that never like help people live longer because oftentimes people with metabolic disorders, weight issues have been doing that for years and years and years, and it rarely makes that better, right? So that's the first thing. So typically speaking, to me, intermittent fasting would have your eating period as late as possible in your day. At least like start at 6 p.m. would be the soonest I would recommend it. 6, 7 p.m. would probably be best. So that means that the whole day is spent being physically active and mentally active, using fuel, and not eating. Okay. And that actually is one of the benefits of intermittent fasting. Once you've adapted to it and you don't get those psychological cravings, you will actually have more mental clarity while by not eating because of the release of adrenaline and cortisol, which might seem bad, but if your goal is to be mentally focused, mentally aware, being able to be more productive, then it might actually be a benefit that need to be fixed in the future. But it's something that can help. Like the times I do intermittent fasting personally are the days where I'm giving seminars. Because if I'm giving a seminar, I want to be as sharp as possible to be able to answer questions, being able to get all my material in that 6 hours of presentation, and so on and so forth. So typically, when I'm presenting, I'm not eating throughout the day, and I will eat once I finish my presentation at around 6 when I get back to the hotel, go to the grocery store, and stuff like that. And that's the reason why I'm doing it. It's not to get leaner. It's not to get in better shape. It's not to get healthier. It really is just for that adrenaline release that for that punctual situation is helpful to me. Okay. Now, are there other situations or reason why where intermittent fasting can be a useful situation? Well, let's first discuss where it's not an effective strategy. Okay, first, it's not an effective strategy if your goal involves building a significant amount of muscle mass, even a small amount of muscle mass for that regard. You're not going to be able to build as much muscle with intermittent fasting as using a regular eating schedule, simply because, well, it's going to be really hard to get enough protein in you to maximize the anabolic response, right? Also, the fact that maybe you can get like 200 grams of protein in one sitting by getting like a mega shake or something, or a huge amount of food, but there's still the absorption and digestion issue, which might be hindered by such a huge amount of hard to digest food. Okay? And also, there's the fact that even if you have a big boost in protein at the end of the day, it might not be and probably is not enough or to compensate for the long period where you were more catabolic because of low protein availability. Okay, I've personally, and I've used intermittent fasting for months at a time when it first came out. When just tnation.com posted an article about the Warriors diet, which is true intermittent fasting. I did that for like I think 3 or 4 months. That was following a bodybuilding competition, and I wanted to stay lean while being able to enjoy more of the street food that I liked. Okay, that was a bad mindset. I'm going to get to that in a moment. But it worked. It kept me lean, but I did not gain an ounce of muscle. In fact, in all of the times I actually did fairly long durations of intermittent fasting, like a few months, I've never were able to build muscle regardless of the strategy I was using. Maybe some people did, and I don't doubt that. But personally, it never happened to me. And certainly, even if it happens in other, it's probably at a much slower rate that it normally would have happened. The thing that once you get leaner, it gives the illusion of a more muscular body. So you can compare pictures when you are like let's say 15% body fat, then when you're 9% body fat. Even if you have less muscle in the picture at 9% body fat, you look like you have a lot more muscle. So if you just go by images or what you look like, it can certainly give you the illusion that you're building muscle. Okay, so right from the start, if your goal is building a significant amount of muscle, intermittent fasting is not for you. I think that a lot of people get suckered into intermittent fasting because they see it as well. That's the holy grail. I can lose fat and build muscle at the same time. I'm gonna have my fat loss period earlier today and a muscle building period later in the day. It doesn't work like that. It never happened that way. So again, if your goal is building muscle, I would stay away from intermittent fasting. Okay. Other people who should stay away from intermittent fasting are those, and that's what I did at first, those who are using intermittent fasting as a way to have the green light to eat whatever the hell they want to eat and still stay lean. First, it never works out well. Okay, I've actually had clients asking me to do intermittent fasting, and I knew that was the reason because they were sugar bugs or people with binging issues, for example. And what would happen is at first they made a pretty good effort in starting with clean foods and having only some amount of cheap food or dessert or whatnot at the end of the meal. And quickly that proportion would reverse until it's basically all pleasure food. Okay. And what you need to understand is intermittent fasting is not a diet. Intermittent fasting is an eating schedule. Okay, you should still eat the same food in the same amount as you would if you were eating 3 or 4 or 5 regular meals in a day. So if your goal is to get leaner, well, you're probably not going to be eating pizza or cake or pastries or ice cream on a daily basis. Okay, you can argue that, well, if it fits your macro, you can do that. Yeah, but the amount of what you're getting it is so small that it's almost impossible to stick with that amount. Anyway, so when you're doing intermittent fasting, it's simply compressing the eating period, but using the same foods. That would be the appropriate way of using intermittent fasting. If you're using it as a justification to be able to eat whatever you want, that never ends well. Plus, it will reinforce bad relationship with food habits. It basically programs your brain that if I'm depriving myself, I can eat all the crap that I want. And the problem is that that crap still have, let's say, pro-inflammatory responses. It can increase blood pressure. It can lead to arteriosclerosis, all that kind of good stuff, right? So eating a large amount of cheat food, crappy processed food, combining sugar and fat and salt, especially in that one eating window, will surely do that. So the health benefit are not there. And when you go back to regular eating, now you still have that pattern in your brain that now you've tasted that food, so it's really hard to get back to regular eating. That's always my experience. So if someone is looking for a way to be able to lose fat while eating whatever they want, that never ends well. Never ends well, and they should not use intermittent fasting. So that comes back to what intermittent fasting is appropriate for. As I mentioned, I personally believe that it should not be like a regular eating strategy. Okay, for very few people, especially if you have a high level of stress. Well, the fact that you are not eating for 16 hours, in fact, you're not eating for more than 16 hours, but you're being 16 hours fasted, in that fasted state, you do release more cortisol. You do release more adrenaline, which is actually why that kind of dieting or nutrition strategy can help increasing focus and clarity and stuff like that. But the downside is if you overproduce cortisol, you do have negative effects from a muscle building perspective. Eventually, in the long run, it can lower testosterone and so on and so forth. Right? So it's not, and if you have a really stressful lifestyle, okay, stressful job, whatever, financial issues, then you already are producing more cortisol than normal people. If you use an eating strategy that favors more cortisol, then you have that huge chunk of cortisol that will lead to all kind of bad stuff, right? So those who could actually do that on of a more of a, let's say, long-term eating strategy would be people with extremely low life stress. Let's say you are retired and have tons of money in the bank, and all you do for your days are playing golf, watching TV. You probably can pull it off, right? But other people, that is not a good long-term eating strategy. It can be used in the short term to get specific goals, specific effects. For example, me when I'm presenting for a seminar, I like to use intermittent fasting because I find I have better focus and better mental clarity when giving my seminar. In fact, during a seminar, I do want more cortisol. I do want more adrenaline because it dramatically, exponentially increases my mental power. Okay, so that's something I want. Another issue is that if you have, let's say, digestive issues, it might be good to have a long period of time in your day where you're not eating food. In that case, though, you can't like binge out in the feeding period because you're just gonna make those matters worse. So it would be a period where you do intermittent fasting, but with a pretty low amount of easy to digest food, and that would be like a 3 days, 1 week strategy. Not for fat loss, but just to give the digestive system a break. So you would have probably like supplement with probiotics, and then enzymes during that period. Okay. And besides that, okay, maybe if you are a fighter, MMA, I know it's popular in MMA circles because, well, they have to practice almost throughout the day, various martial arts training and stuff like that. And sometimes eating, especially it's high carbs, can have a sedative effect. And uh, if especially if you're trying to lose weight or make weight, that could be a potentially effective strategy, but it's not the one I would personally. I know it's being used. I would personally not recommend it. So really, for me, intermittent fasting is more of a punctual strategy to get a very specific effect. But as soon as you can, you go back to a more normal eating pattern. All right. That having been said, let's go see if there are some questions, and they are. All right. Let's get to the questions. What strategy do you recommend for maximum glute development? Is that maximum glute development or glute max development? Anyway, do you believe the hip thrust is worth it, or are there better exercises? Among the popular exercises, exercises you see a lot of people doing in the gym, and that don't look completely stupid. Like I'm not talking about exercises that are popular on social media just because they look cool, but movements that have been used for a good number of years by a lot of people. That typically mean that that exercise is effective. If it were not effective, people would have stopped doing it. So the same thing holds true for the hip thrust. If it were not effective, people would not be doing it anymore because they would have realized that, you know what, first of all, it's uncomfortable, and if it's uncomfortable, it needs to work. Otherwise, I'm going to stop doing it. So the fact that they are still doing it means to me that it is working. That having been said, I do not believe that it's an exceptional exercise. I don't believe it's a magical exercise, meaning that you can get the same type of glute development with other exercises. I personally don't really like it. I personally don't feel my glutes. Even using all the strategies I know about how to improve mind muscle connection and targeting a muscle, for me, it never worked on the hip thrust, and neither for my wife. Now we both have short legs and a long torso, and we both have a long tibia, short femur. So that's a lever that put the quadriceps in a very strong mechanical position. So a movement like a thrust for us, it's actually more quad than anything. Even though the quad is not the prime mover, it is still contracting, and whenever the body can, our body can, it will focus on quadriceps. So we never got anything from it. People with longer legs, which is most typical women, but like longer legs relative to their torso, especially if they have a shorter tibia versus the femur, I believe that it can be a very effective exercise to target the glutes. To me, and it's going to sound weird because it's an exercise on which you can use a lot of weight. I classify it more as an isolation exercise than a compound or main lift. When you think about it, it's really supposedly an isolating the. Anyway, it's not a movement that personally I like for me. That having said, I still program it from time to time if the person responds well to it. I personally and my wife the same. Again, we have short legs. We do get more out of the glute from stuff like Romanian deadlift and Romanian deadlift with a band attached to the again, it will depend on your lever. Some people with long legs, for example, they will get a lot of glutes development from squatting. Personally, I don't get development from squatting because, again, I'm quads dominant. So there's no exercise that will be optimal for absolutely everyone. But just like that, there's very few exercises that are completely ineffective. It's always going to be probably the best exercise for someone. Okay, that might not be you, but some people for them it will be the best exercise. So asking someone like you go to the gym and the person has great glutes, what's your favorite glute exercise? That's not always going to give you a usable answer because most people who do have very good glute or any other muscle, they probably have a genetic predisposition for building that muscle tissue, either because that muscle tissue is more responsive, or more likely because their body structure facilitates the development of that muscle. Any new research on neurotyping? No. If you could up the data, the course, that what would you have? Actually, I'm upgrading the course. I've actually I haven't started filming it yet, but I did give an updated neurotyping class last year just to test out the waters, and it is, I would say, significantly changed and improved so much so that I will film an update. That's actually my next on my to-do list. I do have a seminar coming up in February, and after that, I'm going to get to work on the new neurotyping course. Should I try to do my strength session on empty stomach early morning before breakfast? Why would you want to do that? I mean, I see absolutely no logical reason to do it, except for the fact that you might get a bit more neurologically amped up because of the very high level of cortisol in the morning, which, as you might know, leads to a higher level of adrenaline. Cortisol increases the conversion of noradrenaline into adrenaline. Okay? So that might give you a boost in performance for the session. It might also help cause greater risk of what we call overtraining and what I call training burnout, which is caused by a downregulation of the beta adrenergic receptors, the receptors that interact with adrenaline. So if you overproduce adrenaline, sure, it can give you a boost in the short term, but the likelihood of making your receptors resistant, which will decrease performance in the future, is pretty high. And it also depends on the amount of volume you're doing. So if you're doing a pretty high amount of volume for your strength session, being fasted is likely going to cause more of a catabolic response, which makes it harder to become net anabolic after the session. And not to mention that you might actually lose focus after that moment. Also, well, again, it depends. There was a Russian. It wasn't a study because that wasn't published in journals. It's something I read in a translated Russian textbook for weightlifting, and they tested what they call the readiness of the nervous system. So basically, what they did was every hour they asked weightlifters to do a grip test. Okay, and we would look at the amount of kilos of grip strength at every single hours while the lifters are awake. And what they noticed is that it was not the same at every hour. It would peak, then go down, then peak again, then go down. And because grip strength is not grip strength is it's not reliant on muscle mass. It's almost purely neurological. It's a pretty good test to evaluate the readiness of your nervous system to produce high level of force. So yes, realistically speaking, the stronger your grip is, relative, of course, to your own capacity at the time of the day, that's the time of the day where you will be at your strongest. And the study found that for most lifters, we had two peaks in strength, in grip strength. The first one was 3 hours after waking up, and the next one was 8 hours after waking up. So if you train almost as soon as you wake up, you will be in a suboptimal neurological state. You can kind of counteract that by having more adrenaline release because you're fasted, but it probably will not make up for the fact that your nervous system is just not activated enough to perform. Personally, I always wake up at something like it depends on days, between 5 and 6 a.m. And my training is typically at 9 or 9:30. My strength training. So that's roughly three hours and a half after I wake up. And of course, I actually work In the hours after I wake up, I do programming and stuff like that, which actually amps up my nervous system. So when I'm training, I'm in the best thing possible. And I'm a morning person. I just could not see myself like go lift heavy, let's say 30 minutes or 45 minutes after I've woken up. That just wouldn't work well. You mentioned 6 p.m. to break the fast with the meal. What time should the athlete have strength session and be at the gym? Okay, as I mentioned, that's for intermittent fasting. Okay. And to me, very few, if any, athletes should use intermittent fasting. So I don't like your question because if I give you an answer, you're gonna assume, well, athletes can use intermittent fasting if they train at that time. No, I'm gonna give you an answer, but I'm gonna tell you to not do that. Okay, if you're an athlete, do not. I repeat, do not use intermittent fasting. Punctual strategy to be used for a very short period of time. And it's not something I would typically do when there's a strength training or hypertrophy training involved in that day. You could do energy systems work. I would not lift on that day. If you absolutely have to do intermittent fasting, again, if you are Muslim and you have Ramadan, you don't have a choice but to do intermittent fasting. So in that case, to me, the best time to train would be slightly after you've broken the fast. For example, let's say that you're breaking the fast at 6 p.m., you would have a very small meal, just some carbs, some very easy to digest protein, some water, electrolytes, then go train, let's say 30 minutes later. And then when you come back from training, you would have most of your food intake. But again, if an athlete does intermittent fasting, to me, that is not, it never will be optimal, never, especially if gaining strength or muscle is your main goal. As a type 2A person, is intermittent fasting beneficial? Intermittent fasting, I'm going to say it again, that really was not my goal when I decided to talk about intermittent fasting. My goal was to discourage people from using intermittent fasting. I thought that was pretty clear. And now I get questions about who should use it. Is it good? It's not good. It, if you are a serious lifter, no muscle can be built when you're not eating food. It will never be optimal for anybody interested in building muscle and getting stronger. Forget about that. Regardless of your neurotype, no, no, just no. Okay, I'm the same. Where in taking enough nutrients is concerned, I go to sleep with a full stomach due to trying to get all my nutrients for the day in order to put on size. Yeah, for I assume that you mean intermittent fasting because that would be the only reason why you have to really stuff yourself in the evening. Coming from the center, I'm struggling here. Well, okay, I'm going to assume that you are indeed talking about using intermittent fasting. I'm going to tell you to go back to what I originally said. If your goal is to build muscle, intermittent fasting doesn't work, period. If you are struggling to build size, it's even a worse idea. There is literally no world in which someone who has problems building muscle from because of genetics or whatever, maybe a digestion issues, nutrients absorption issues, whatever, okay, or excess cortisol production. There is no universe in which intermittent fasting is the solution to fix that problem. In fact, it will cause more problems. So my advice is don't do intermittent fasting. Don't hop on a bandwagon just because people makes it sound cool, because you want to be part of a group, because you have a few people who are ripped and claim to do intermittent fasting. In reality, they probably, when they were actually building muscle, they were not intermittent fasting. Okay, when they built most of their muscles, they were not intermittent fasting. Then they got, yeah, you can get lean with intermittent fasting because, well, you're not eating. So it's kind of easy to create a calorie deficit if you're using intermittent fasting. So if someone already has a decent amount of muscle mass on them, which they build, without intermittent fasting. When they start intermittent fasting, they lose a good amount of fat, they look leaner, they look more muscular. So just like going from picture before, after a picture, they look like they gain a lot of muscle. In reality, they didn't. They didn't. I remember when I posted my own first physical transformation. It was like probably like the second or third article I've ever written on creation. So that was something like 24 years ago. Okay, it's called the Beast Evolve or whatnot. Uh, and I went from looking like a chubby guy at the gym to looking like super lean and defined. And people, by looking at those pictures, you would assume that I had gained at least 20 pounds of muscle in the second picture. Okay. But in reality, I actually lost some muscle. Okay. But because I went from something like 20% body fat to something like 9% body fat, I look like a completely different human being. I already had a muscle. Even if I did not look muscular in the before picture, I was squatting 600 pounds. I was bench pressing 400. I was snatching 315. I was clean and jerking 365. I was power cleaning 37. I was cleaning 375. I was push pressing 315 for reps. I was front squatting close to 500 pounds. But I did not look muscular because first my structure, I naturally have narrow shoulders, long torso, short legs, and I had a pretty high amount of body fat for me, so I did not look like I lifted, but I had a lot of muscle under there. So once I got lean, well, I looked a lot more muscular. So we built lots of muscle. No, I didn't. If you look at my body fat, I actually lost 5 pounds of muscle in the process, but it was still visually worth it. So it's easy to look at people who they look great shirtless and they do this video, well, I'm intermittent fasting. That's the way to get shredded. I'm looking this good and I'm only eating one meal a day. I'm eating pizza and stuff like that. In reality, again, they probably build most of that muscle throughout the years when they were eating pretty much normally. I mean, if you are training hard right from the start, you will add at least 50% of the total amount of muscle you can build in your training career in that first year of training. So I really doubt that most people who are experts today and claiming that intermittent fasting got them there were doing intermittent fasting the first year of training. So right from the start, at least 50% of your muscle gain was not done with intermittent fasting. The second year can account to 25% of your total muscle mass. In reality, most of the muscle mass you will build during the first 3 years of serious training. And they were probably not doing intermittent fasting back then. And it's just because it gives the illusion, or they just don't tell you that story because they have something to sell to you. But in reality, you're not going to be building muscle from intermittent fasting. You're not. I mean, there might be some genetic exceptions to that, but you're clearly not because you're struggling to build muscle. Have you experimented with the vertical diet? No, yeah, no. My one of my lifters who also worked for me, Naomi, world record holder on squat. At 67 kilos body weight, she squatted 265 in competition. That's 265 kilos, not pounds. She actually did 270 kilos, close to 600 pounds, for a double in the gym. She once actually hired Stan Efferding, who invented the vertical diet, to uh, to design her diet, and she stopped after like a month and a half. She just couldn't tolerate it because basically the principle is you just like basically eat steak and rice as the cornerstone of your diet, and the goal is just to gradually increase it. And she just couldn't handle it. I mean, again, most of the time, if your diet has a name, I would probably run away from that. I'm not saying it's not good, but a lot of people, it's not the name diet that's bad. It's the fact that you are attracted by a diet that the name that's bad. Basically, it means that you are excited, I want to belong in that concept, and you lose all objectivity. Instead of looking at the principle, instead of looking at the actual structure of the diet, if it fits your own personal need as an athlete, if it's adequate for you, and so on and so forth, you just become seduced by something that looks cool. whether it's intermittent fasting, keto, vertical diet, carnivore, if you are just attracted to a concept because it looks cool, it looks like not many people are doing this, it might be magical answer. It might be the secret I'm looking for. That's bullshit. It doesn't work. I mean, man, when I say man, the human species has been eating food for a freaking long time, right? And people have been getting strong, muscular, and athletic for a freaking long time. You didn't need those special diets. You just ate good, unprocessed, natural food most of the time with a focus on protein. So that's pretty much it. What's a good rule of thumb on cheat meals? Best rule of thumb on cheat meals is don't have cheat meals. I heard every 21 meals. Why 21 meals? And then one cheat. Is it good to avoid relapse and binge? The person, but why 21 meals? That's highly specific, right? So if I'm eating 20 meals in one day, does it mean I can have one cheat meal every day? Hmm? If I'm only eating, if I'm eating 6 meals a day versus if I'm eating 3 meals a day, that means my cheat will be twice as often. I mean, you can see there's no logic there, right? I think that the reason for the logic behind the 21 meals is that we typically say that it takes 21 days to break a habit. So that 21 number, or was in some studies with rats, okay, if they have to respond to a certain stimuli 21 times, let's say for example like the Pavlov study, right? So you would, let's say for example, make a noise, a specific honk honk noise, and every time there's a noise, there's food coming in. After 21 times, you need to honk honk without food. The rat will still start salivating. Okay, that's programming. It doesn't work as well with human species that has cognition, that can evaluate factors. I mean, try to okay, try to do the honk honk thing that eat cake and for 21 times, and then do the honk honk 22nd time without the cake, you will not have the same response as rats would. Okay? That's probably where it comes from. It's from psychology, but it just is not applicable. There is literally zero logic there. Zero logic. Okay? And if that were the case, I mean, the human species would not have survived because we have not been eating these things called cheat meals for a long time. It's only one highly processed, highly palatable, marketed foods made just to these foods are literally designed to make you eat more, sell you more product. There's like an area of research in the food industry where they look at the best mix in ingredient, texture, taste that will force you to binge out. That's literally how the processed foods are designed. They are designed to maximize your desire to eat so that they will sell you more stuff. That's why the if it fits your macro diet rarely works because the moment you start eating those highly palatable foods, you oftentimes will just be forced to overeat because you can't control yourself. That's because it's scientifically designed to make you crave more and eat more. That's how it's designed. People are making millions of dollars coming up with those recipes so that food companies can make more money. That's what it is. Okay. Anyway, so that's why for me, and again, I don't always follow my rule because I'm a sugar addict. Okay, but I can go strict for a pretty long time. But if you're truly serious about changing your body, a cheat meal should not be something that is programmed in your diet. And maybe sometimes you will have one just because you can't help yourself, because you can't control yourself for some reason, because that's all that's available, uh, whatever. Okay? That will, and I'm aware of that, and I allow that, I include that as a coach, but I will not plan them. Like, I have a client, this is your diet, see that day there, that's on Sunday, you can have a cheat meal. I would never do that. I did it in the past, not anymore, because it always lead to bad behavior with people who have problems with food, who have a bad relationship with food, which is almost 100% of the people who are looking for a specific diet to lose fat. Because if you're looking for a specific diet to lose fat, you probably are not capable of losing fat by yourself, which indicates to me that you have self control issues or whatever, right? So I believe in refeeds or meals with a higher intake or higher level of carbohydrates to refill muscle glycogen, which can be lowered when you are in a caloric deficit, and also to prevent the drop in level. But that's done with the same carbs that are already in your diet, just more of them. Okay, I believe in that. I believe there are benefits in that, but there is no physiological benefit to using highly processed cheat food as a refeed. There's no logic to that. Yes, again, those foods did not exist, or very few existed 50 years ago, and people still survive. I wonder how. Again, keep in mind that all those processed foods are scientifically created to maximize your desire to eat those foods. So if you're someone who naturally binges out or have those cravings, you're sensitive to those scientifically processed formulated processed food. Some people are less sensitive, meaning that they can eat a little and it's fine because they're probably not neurologically speaking uh, sensitive to the uh, I want to say a craving inducing effect of those foods. Okay, but most people will have a response to those foods that make them crave more and more and more and more. So it's not a matter of the frequency. The moment you have them, you want more, and it's extremely hard to defeat. So now you are building a really bad relationship with food in that you tell yourself, I can survive those 21 meals, then I will be allowed to have my cheat. So now you're functioning by a deprivation reward system, which is something you don't. You don't. So to me, I would just go from the starting point that there will be no cheat meals. There will be no cheat meals. Okay, that's the rule. Now, there will be exception where you just can't control yourself. You will slip. You will fall off the bandwagon. That will happen. But you should go from the premise that these things called cheats don't exist. Refeed exists. But that's it. I wanted to ask a quick question about novelty as far as exercise selection goes for hypertrophy. That's because I think the better I get at, say, the bench press, the less I recruit chest. Uh, that makes no sense. Unless you're so strong with your triceps that the better you become at the bench press, the more efficient you become at recruiting your triceps or front delts. Okay. In reality, what happens is the more you perform an exercise, the more the muscles involved in that exercise become at responding to the neurological drive. Therefore, they become easier to recruit and they require a lesser neural drive, lesser signal to recruit the fast twitch fibers. So that makes it easier to stimulate that muscle. Okay. So the question might be, in your case, is the bench press a good exercise for you for your chest? Because that's not always the case. For me, the bench press has never been a good chest exercise. Okay? Even when I was bench pressing 445 pounds or 200 kilos, I did not have a big chest. Okay? But it's not because I became so strong and so good at the bench press that my chest magically stopped working. Okay. It's just because for me, mechanically speaking, with my levers and stuff and my muscle dominances, the bench press was never a good chest exercise. Okay. So the moment I grew my chest was when I was using a lot more targeted exercises. Okay? Because I have, especially back then, very dominant triceps and front deltoid, so any pressing movement focus mostly on those muscles. So the more you do a movement, okay, the better you will be at recruiting those muscles and the less draining the exercise can become. So that might also be what's happening. Like, let's say you do the bench press or an exercise more and more and more and more, it becomes less fatiguing. And a lot of people equate fatigue with results. So I can see that if I'm doing an exercise and it causes less overall fatigue, I could very easily start to believe, well, I not stimulating much, but in reality, it's just because you're so much more efficient at recruiting the muscles. What happens is at the neuromuscular junction, the more you practice movement, the more the muscles involved. At the synaptic level, you either make those synapses more sensitive to the neural drive, or you actually add more synapses. That makes the movement more efficient. So the fact that you in the bench press again, you're hitting it less in your chest. It was probably because it was never meant to be a good chest or pectoral exercise for you in the first place. Maybe at first, because your triceps or your shoulders were lagging behind, you had to rely more on your chest. Now, because of more practice, because of more training, probably because of improvement in technique, maybe the other muscles contribute more, so you feel less in the chest. It that doesn't become less effective at stimulating muscle. It's probably just that it was never a good chest exercise in the first place. I do believe that you can build on an empty stomach, but I wake up so full that I need to fast for an hour or two. Okay, I don't. I start my day drinking tea, then proceed to eating fruit, and lastly, my Solman sandwich with a protein shake. Well, right from the start, uh, well, okay, I don't understand your schedule. Is that like in one meal or is that your whole day? Because it seems to me that you're very low in protein if that's your whole day. But yeah, you believe that you can build on empty stomach. No, you can't. I mean, do what you want. If you want to believe that you can build muscle on an empty stomach and build muscle on intermittent fasting, well, you're not building muscle right now. That's why you asked me the question. I don't believe it is. Just because my answer does not please you doesn't mean it's not the right one. True, I can't answer neurotyping questions. Don't take this the wrong way. It's because it's still a very, I want to say, niche concept. My goal is to reach as many people as possible. If I spend like 10 minutes answering a question, that's 10 minutes that most people will not want to hear. I want to work on biceps and triceps more. You want to do a lot of things, right? Because you mentioned in the past you want to do CrossFit, you want to do explosive work, you want to do arms now. I understand that you like variety. I like variety too, but you need to be able to focus. I heard arms and calves recover fast. Why? Why have you heard that? Never. Okay, calves, okay, calves, it's because most people don't train them properly. They don't train calves with a hard enough stimulus that they actually need time to recover because the range of motion is so short, let's say a few inches, that the amount of mechanical work performed on calf exercise is super small. So people, when they do calves like regular exercises, it doesn't do much. So if it doesn't do much, there's not much to recover from. If you train calves properly, which would be 2 seconds, hold in a stretch position, going up slowly to avoid using the stretch reflex, which is very powerful, and going down slowly for sets of 12 to 15 reps, focusing on progressive overload over time, you can't train them as often as you think. Right. Can I work out arms as second session of post workouts? Lightweight and a higher reps for pump and no, I would not do that. I mean, you can do whatever you want. That's your training. To me, that's just wasted energy. Again, there was this study conducted, oh, not conducted, but provided by Chris Beardsley, who compared training frequency of hitting a muscle. And what he noticed is that if a muscle is trained too often, so the time between stimulation is too short, the amount of protein synthesis growth stimulated was smaller if the time between session was shorter. And the amount of protein synthesis peaked at training a muscle every 72 hours or something like that. So if you're training your arms every day, you will get the illusion of growth. The illusion of growth coming from inflammation, but it's not muscle. It just gives you the illusion. In reality, each training session you are doing gives you less growth because there's not enough time between sessions. Doing too much more is never the answer. I'm going to give you the answer I always give. when it comes to specialization because you seem to want to focus on bringing up your arms and calves now. It changes every week. So next week you want probably going to focus on your shoulder, whatever. But I'm going to give you the answer for this week. Um, when you put something in the program, you need to take something out. Otherwise, you're just piling on stuff, piling on stress, and you will exceed your capacity to recover. I admire your desire to train harder, okay? But that it doesn't work like that, especially if you're not enhanced, not using anabolic. Your capacity to recover from training stress has a limit. So the more you push it upwards, the more the systemic stress is high, the less you will recover, you will progress. So if you want to put biceps and triceps in, be my guest, but you need to take something out so that the overall volume is the same. I don't think it's a good strategy, but if you want to do it, you at least need to make sure that the overall volume of work does not go up. I have a big I have a bigger hamstring and they're stronger than my quads according to my structure balance A ratio. Can I start working quads? Can I start working on my quads? And okay, so now it's not arms and calves; it's arm, calves, and quads. Okay, I'm gonna skip the question because you're. I mean, I appreciate all the questions you've posted in the past 6 weeks. Okay, but these questions just annoy me. It just the reason it annoys me. It's not against you. Uh, It annoys me in the same way that my son annoys me when he makes the same mistakes I made, and that pisses me off because I know what you're asking to do is something I did. I was that excessive person who would train twice a day. I would be that person who would do too much work for too many things at the same time. Okay, and if there's one thing I wish I could go back and change my training. That would be it. Okay. I would want to be more structured, follow a better, smarter structure for a longer time, and not be excessive in my training. I would have been a zillion times better than I was. And that pisses me off to this day. So when I see someone make the exact same mistakes as I did, it pisses me off because I know there's nothing I can tell you that will make you change your mind. And even when you think it works, it's not working. I see. I don't have access to cables in my own gym, and my triceps fatigue first on chest presses. What would be your next big thing for maximizing chest growth without making it a limiting factor? With the limited amount of exercises you have, you're kind of in a bind. It's honestly, it's kind of hard to do because my natural strategy here would be to be more isolation work for chest, either by itself or as a post method. So, for example, or even pre-fatigue method of combining certain and isolation exercise for pectorals with your big pressing movement, but you don't have access to equipment that allows you to do that efficiently. So it's kind of hard for me to make a good recommendation. I mean, you could do dumbbell flies, but to me, dumbbell flies are not a great exercise, but it's still better than doing anything. You could try doing flies just before bench press for 4 weeks, just to pre-fatigue your chest, so that it will fatigue roughly the same time as your triceps when you're pressing. And after 4 weeks, you reverse the order. You start with a bench press, and then you perform the fly afterwards to finish the fatigue. So that's what I would do. But again, with the limited amount of exercises, I mean, I'm pretty smart with this training thing, but like limited equipment is something that even the brightest mind in training cannot overcome. All right. So, um, guys, okay, so you mentioned that your question is for your girlfriend. Okay, I'm gonna decide to trust you on that one. Okay, so I'm guessing the quads to hamstring thing is for your girlfriend. Uh, how can I start to work on my quads to make them proportional to hamstrings? Well, first, it would be to switch your squatting or compound lifts to a more quadriceps dominant movement. I am assuming that, again, assuming that it's for her, that she has long legs relative to her torso and that her femurs are longer than her tibias, which makes her squatting or whatever more of a combined squat and hinge than a pure squat. So the first thing would be to switch to a squat, quote unquote, variation that is more quads dominant. That could be a hack squat machine. It could be the pendulum squat machine. With free weight, it could be a narrow stance front squat with heels elevated. It could be an elevated close stance safety bar squat. These would put a bit more emphasis on the quadriceps. And obviously, when it comes to the assistance exercise strategy, you would go with more targeted quadriceps exercise. Like people claim that the leg extension is the devil, but if you truly want to isolate the quadriceps and bring it up to be balanced with your hamstrings, it's still the best exercise. Okay? So a leg extension, single leg extension, and if you are more of the functional crowd, you could do backward sled drag, making sure that you stay crouched down and really pushing with your heels when walking backward. That will give you the same type of stimulus as a leg extension. Would you warm up for neutral charge workouts? Yes and no. Meaning that you would gradually increase the intensity, but it would still be, well, explosive work. I mean, I would probably still do something like 5 minutes of just cardio just to increase body temperature. Doing explosive work on a cold body is not really a good idea. I would probably do just some movement first. Let's say body weight squat, maybe push ups, just to get the joints moving. And when you start your neural card circuit, I would probably just start with the same exercises and reps as you will for your workout, but go, let's say the first circuit is at 50% intensity. So instead of, let's say you're using jump, instead of trying to jump as high as you can, just jump half as high as you can, or three quarters as high as you can. So you do one warm up circuit like that, then you should probably be. All right, guys, we're at the hours. Very interesting questions. I hope you appreciated my foray into intermittent fasting. So I'm going to see you next week. Uh, I'm probably still going to be here around the holidays. By the way, I'm not someone who celebrate holidays much. In fact, in my family and my wife's family, because we have many uncles and whatever. Okay, um, and hence we're actually celebrating Christmas on December 30th and December 26th. So the normal days, I'm still gonna be here. Anyway, anywhere I have a computer, I can still do these for an hour. I'm not a family-oriented person when it comes to those gatherings, so I much prefer answering your questions than talking about pretty much anything else. Uh, Last question I have here: what are your thoughts on hack squat and reverse hack squat? Currently pushing 63 kilos on each and doing regular reverse with pyramid reducing weight. I don't see a question there. I mean, what are my thoughts on hack squat? I just mentioned that hack squat is a great quadriceps dominant exercise. So I don't see what you want me to add. When you're doing reverse pyramid decreasing weight, sure. I mean, that's a good scheme. In reality, when it comes to building muscle, there are really no better schemes than others. But if it motivates you and you train hard on it, that's fine. But it's not going to be superior to straight sets. All right, guys.